Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and I am so happy to welcome you to today's user share webinar. We're going to be talking about some things that you can do. Sorry, I have a puppy that decided not to sit still. Talking about things you can do about protecting your Citrix Gateway. Lots of great tips and some demos coming your way today. But before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that we do have our next in-person XL event in Kansas City next week. We're so excited to see everybody. It's been 2 years since we've seen everyone in person. I think it's going to be a really great day. You can still register. The whole day is free, and all you have to do is get there. So hopefully we'll see you in Kansas City next week. All right, so as I mentioned, we're here to talk about protecting Citrix Gateway. We are recording today's presentation, so if you have to duck out early, no worries. You'll get a link to that recording tomorrow. It's going to come to you directly from GoToWebinar, so just be on the lookout for that. Also, we want you to type your questions into the chat as you have them. I think we have, during the presentation today, we have 3 kind of designated areas where we're going to take some Q&A, but go ahead and type your questions in as you have them so you don't forget them, and we'll get to as many as we can today. All right, so I'm happy to welcome to the CUGC webinar stage Johannes Norz. Johan, I love this picture of you. I want to know about this cat. I'm gonna incorrectly call it a leopard or a jaguar. I don't know what it is. So. A cheetah.
Yeah,
there's a lot of spotted cats. So welcome to the webinar. And we also have with us today Leee Jeffries. Leee is going to keep an eye on all of your questions and ask those at the appropriate time. So hello, Leee. We can't see you, but I know you're there.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yep, pleasure to be here.
All righty. Oh, there he is. He's real. All right, Johan, I'm going to send you the screen. Let me do that right now. And I'll make you the presenter, and then I'm going to disappear for a second, and I'll come back at the end.
So, can you see my screen now? Did I do it right?
Not yet. I can't see it yet. There we go. I see it.
Yep.
You see it?
Oh, it went.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's about protecting Citrix Gateway. It's about what to do, how to do, what can you do, what do you need to do, and so on. Well, first of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Johannes Norz. Well, that's what I'm looking like if I don't kiss a cheetah. I'm a Citrix certified expert on application delivery and security. I'm also Citrix certified instructor, and I'm a member of Citrix Technology Advocates, CTA. I'm very proud of this. I'm a blogger, I'm a technical evangelist, I'm a consultant. Most of the time I'm trainer and consultant. I live in Austria, in Europe, Central Europe. My native language is German, so I hope you can understand my English anyway. I love Italian red wine. So from private perspective, I do a lot of race bike driving. So maybe you see some behind me. There are some more other way around. So there are plenty of them. And I do a lot of backpacking. So we hiked all through Spain, all through Turkey, all through Bulgaria, and so on. My wife and me do a lot of backpacking. I'm always ready for new projects. I'm a one-man company, so it's a one-man show, mainly working for Citrix Consulting Services and for some of the German platinum partners. I'm doing anything for money as long as it involves a Citrix ADC, of course. I do installations, audits, trainings, workshops, both on-site or virtual. Well, that's about me. We will talk about the problems we face with the Citrix Gateway, whether or not the gateway is secure, about best practices, about denial of service protection, about bot protection, and we will do some demo and testing. I will have a demo session after the best practice part, after the DOS part, and after the bot protection part. And I plan to answer the questions during the demos or shortly after the demos. So feel free to ask questions whenever you have. The world in IT became less secure. There are several reasons for this. First of all, during the COVID crisis, a lot of customers had to open up their networks for external access. I remember one job I had a bit more than 2 years ago. It was a bank, and they had a huge Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop infrastructure, but they had only access for about 500 people. And from one day to the next, they had to open it up for 14,000. And it was a big challenge to make this happen. And of course, they didn't want to make this happen until next month, but probably until tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So there was no time for much planning, which opens up the door for mistakes, of course. Currently, there are plenty of streamlined attacks for political reasons. So I don't want to point my fingers at countries, but some countries are in war with other countries. So there is a lot of streamlined attacks for political reasons. Some states can't get money on a legal way, so they do a lot of blackmailing to innocent companies to get money. There's a lot of ransomware attacks, both to private and to companies. And the number is still increasing very much. So we need to take IT security more serious than we did before. I think the level of danger is rising quite fast currently. But this is the current OWASP top 10 list. So the one from last year. You see broken access control is #1. So injection came down from 1 to 3. Cryptographic failure, which was sensitive data exposure, is on 2. So this is bypassing authentication, things like this. Injection attacks, so SQL injection, command injections. #4 is insecure design. That's strange because our design always should be secure. So this is administrative mistakes, I would say. Same A5 security misconfiguration. And this one is also administrative mistakes, outdated or vulnerable components that shouldn't happen. Authentication failures, which was previously called broken authentication. Software with buggy software. Security and monitoring failures. Security monitor failures, of course, is not an attack vector, but it keeps people from detecting attacks. Currently, it takes about half a year to detect an attack. That means in many cases, attackers have plenty of time to spend within the victim's network. And this is due to insufficient logging or not looking at logs, of course. Server-side request forgery is not an important one with the gateway. Well, the big question is Citrix Gateway secure? And the answer is Gateway is secure by design. So Citrix did a lot of things to make the gateway secure. But of course, independent of the vendor, there's always a chance for design bugs, for flaws in the code. And I don't want to mention, but we already had a big security issue with the Citrix Gateway. So this can happen. And nobody is sure there is not a bug in it. But Citrix had already done a lot to protect the gateway. Really a huge amount of effort was put into protecting the gateway. But of course, there are some general best practice and a few tricks on top. So things we can do to make things better. Unfortunately, some of the built-in security features are not logging. So for example, the SYNFLOT attack protection doesn't log. So the gateway will never tell you, or the log files will never tell you there had been a SYNFLOT attack, or there had been a slow attack. A slow attack is not as slow as it sounds. They are usually fast. But it's an HTTP request that doesn't fit into one package. So it takes another package to continue with the request. But of course, the second package will not come immediately, but a little bit later. And after a slight delay, there will be a third package and a fourth package and a fifth package and a sixth package. And that way, the receiver, so in this case, the gateway, has to pick up the first package, store it, wait for the second package, store it, wait for the third package, store it, for the fourth package, for the fifth package, and so on. And the receiver will run out of memory. Citrix Gateway, or Citrix ADC, basically does a very good job in protecting from slow attacks. If the requests are queuing up, it will start discarding incomplete requests, but it doesn't log. I had a consulting job, and it was an absolute need to log slow attacks and SYNFLOT attacks, and I did a blog about it. So that's a link to the blog I did. It's not easy to do, to be honest. Of course, we should use multi-factor authentication. It's a must in current IT environments, I think. So at least 2 factors should be there. So the Citrix ADC is out of the box agnostic to SYNFLOT attacks. That's a good thing. This is done because this Citrix ADC handles TCP handshake a little bit different to what the Linux or even a Windows box would do. Usually, and that's what the RFC says. The RFC says if you receive a sync, you should create a receive buffer and a send buffer and send a SYNAC. Well, that's stupid. Why do we need a buffer if we don't? If the session is not set up yet? A SYNFLOT attack will just send SYNs from spoofed IP address. So the receiver will fill all his memory with receiving windows and sending windows, and will run out of memory. The Citrix ADC does not. The Citrix ADC will only create the send and receive windows after receiving the final ACK. And therefore, a SYNFLOT attack will not work. So it will take dramatically more syncs to fill up the memory. So billions of syncs to fill up the memory. So that's the way Citrix ADC and the gateway, of course, as well, handles SYNFLOT attacks. So there's no chance to overload an ADC with SYNFLOT. It's also agnostic to slow attacks. I already told you what slow attacks looks like. So if there is a huge amount of incomplete HTTP requests, so they start queuing up. This is not configurable. It's pre-configured. The ADC will start discarding incomplete requests, and therefore the ADC will not run out of memory, because that's the plan of a slow attack, to make the receiver running out of memory, of course. So the Citrix ADC is pretty well prepared to protect from generic denial of service attacks. That's good. Unfortunately, it doesn't log. So I told you before, I have this blog discussing the issue. But of course, there's some more we can do. For example, do we want to show up the gateway on Google, on Yandex, on Baidu? I think there are some more search engine. I think there's one from Microsoft, but I forgot its name. So we don't want to show it up on, don't want the gateway to show up on search engines, don't we? Because nobody needs to search for it. Maybe we could find a way to find out if a request is coming from a human or from a machine, because humans are always using keyboard and mouse, machines don't do. So there are scripts. Can we do some more denial of service protection? Can we check if a request contains malicious data? I will not go into this because this is way too complex, but I've written a blog about it. Well, so let's go into the best practices. First, we should not use the built-in authentication, 1 or 2-factor authentication for gateway any longer, because it's depreciated. So we should use a AAA server instead. You should create a CAA record, Certificate Authority Authorization record in the DNS server. This is a description on Wikipedia about it. It's a good one. This will keep people from faking your certificate by buying a certificate from another certificate authority. Never link to your gateway from a public website. Why? Because we don't want the gateway to show up, so crawlers could follow the links and put your gateway into the index. Use Iap Reputation service to silently drop malicious requests from well-known malicious IP addresses. It would be a very simple responder policy. The action would be a drop. So this is a responder policy. The name, the expression would be client IP source, IP reputation is malicious, and the action would be a drop. So we would just silently drop requests from IP addresses that are well known to be malicious. The database used for IP reputation service comes from, sorry, I forgot, from WebSense, and they have sensors all over the internet, and Citrix licensed the database, and we can use it in premium edition. If you don't have a premium edition, you can use the same database probably on your firewalls. They're using the same source of IP addresses. There are several classes of malicious IP addresses, but I'm not a fan of using the classes. So I could use, instead of client IP source is malicious, IP reputation is malicious, I could check for spam sources, for mobile threats, and so on. But most of the machines in the databases are machines with some malware on it, and the malware got a plugin system, so you can download plugins for this malware, and the machine will be maybe a spam source for half an hour, and then it will start attacking, doing denial of service attacks, and maybe an hour later it will start doing, I don't know, something else. So they are constantly changing and checking if it's malicious. In most cases is good. What is the downside of using IP reputation feature? The downside of IP reputation feature may be users with dynamic IP addresses, because they may get a previously malicious IP address, maybe today. So yesterday it belonged to a hacker. Today it's an innocent user, and the innocent user will not be able to connect to the gateway. That's a downside. This may happen, but I'm using this policy a lot, and I hardly heard about issues like this. So it's not often to happen. And there's a strict validation HTTP profile. We can bind this to the gateway. I will show you what I'm talking about. So in system profiles, there are HTTP profiles. There are 4 built-in ones. There's a default profile and there's strict validation profile. If I open the strict validation profile, you see a lot of settings here, and there are some interesting ones. HTTP 09 requests will get marked as invalid. HTTP 09 is not the standard that had ever been promoted, but this means everything that's not strictly following the RFC for HTTP 1 or 1.1. Mark non-RFC compliant requests as invalid. Drop extra control carriage return line feeds. Sometimes requests get oversized by adding carriage return line feed characters in it. Mark connect request as invalid. Mark HTTP headers with extra space as invalid. Mark trace request as invalid, and drop all invalid HTTP requests. And this HTTP profile should get bound to the gateway. With the newer versions of ADC, it is already bound, so there's nothing to do with the elder versions, and with updates of elder versions, of course, as well, you have to check if it's there or not. So where is it? So here you see profiles. This is the NS HTTP default strict validation profile. And it's always a good idea to bind it. Of course, if you publish CNAPE in desktop, it's always a good idea to use a CNAPE in desktop TCP profile as well, but this is not security related. Set logon limits. The LDAP authentication doesn't trigger the account lockout. So there's basically a more or less unlimited number of logons possible. If you check the properties of your virtual server and click on, there's something like more here, you see the maximum number of logon attempts and the failed login timeout. So I would suggest permitting 3 login attempts, and then wait for 10 minutes. So lock out the user for a certain amount of time. It's not that important to lock out users for a long period of time, because if you do a dictionary attack and people have the dictionary attack will just simply fail, and a lot of logon attempts will just be dropped instead of processed. So even if the hacker will guess the right password using the dictionary attack, it will not be successful because he will very likely test it against the account lockout. So limit the maximum number of login attempts to an account lockout. And this is how you do it. Set VPN vserver, the name of the server, minus maximum logon attempts, the number of logon attempts you would permit, minus failed login timeout and timeout. Use the IP reputation feature. Using the IP reputation feature is easy, but it's using premium or the WAF license. So premium edition or an additional WAF license. You can buy the WAF license to standard edition as well. The feature needs internet access because it constantly downloads the database. So it will download the database once every 24 hours and do an update, incremental update every 5 minutes. After enabling the feature, you should check var log IP rep log, and it would look like this. So you see, this is starting the IP reputation process. It will connect to the database, will download files. There is a lot of data in between. And in the end, it would say something like IP reputation process exiting with error code 0. Error code 0 is not an error code, but it's an OK. You see here updating PE with database versions. That's it. That's the way it would look like. I will just show you how to enable the IP reputation feature and how to deal with it. So I go into security, reputation, and will just simply enable the feature. You see there's not much of settings. There's nothing like policies or anything like this. There's just reputation settings. And you may add a proxy server here. Next thing I would do, I would create a responder policy. So I would go to responder, create a new policy, add the policy. Responder policy IP reputation, the action would be a drop. So I would just silently drop. And of course, I have to create an expression for this policy, and this would be something like client IP source IP reputation is malicious, like this. Instead, again, I could use the threat categories and select one of the threat categories, but I found out threat categories change a lot, so it's always the same IP address. So I would just go with the is malicious. I would also create a log action. So this is something that would show up in a log. The log level would be an error, and I would put some text in. And then put the IP address in it as well, client IP source. Like this. So this will put this string into the log and add plus the IP address of the client. I'm a big fan of logging everything. So I'm doing a lot of user configurable log messages. Create this, bind it to the gateway. So go to the VPN server, server, and bind the IP reputation policy to it. Bind it with the highest possible priority. So this should be the first one, like this. So this will block any connection from malicious IP addresses. Now, I created the logging action, but the logging action will not log because there's still something missing. So this won't do anything. I will have to go into System and Auditing and change the Audit Syslog settings and allow user configurable log messages. I did this already, but this is not turned on by default, so you have to turn it on. Of course, you have to do this with all the rest of the external Syslog servers as well. So if you have a user-defined external Syslog server, this one also needs to have the user configurable log messages turned on. The next thing I would do after creating the policy is I would just connect to the ADC, log on, go to shell, and check the IP reputation log. And you see it started the IP reputation process. It's updating, blah, blah, blah. This is an out file it created. There's a lot of, you see there's a lot of updates in it. And you see there's some version numbers in it. And in the end, it's exiting with error code 0. So the IP reputation feature downloaded the database. The database is there, everything is good. So the IP reputation feature is working fine. Unfortunately, it's a bit hard to test the IP reputation feature because we won't have a malicious IP address. So we will just see some logs in our log files, but nothing else.
We have some questions when you're ready, Johannes.
Yes, ask me.
So I will fire away. You've got a few. Do you still recommend the XA XD TCP profile bind at the gateway over the new updates Citrix made to the TCP stack for high latency connections?
I would do, but this is only for TCP connections. It's not for UDP connections, so it doesn't work with UDP connections. Do you agree,
Okay, cool.
Lee?
Yes, I agree. I think they made some changes, right? There was, I think, Nagel algorithm was in that profile originally. I think they removed that because it wasn't supposed to be in there. But I think the rule of thumb is always make sure you're on the latest firmware, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
this is the thing I forgot to mention. Always use the latest firmware of the latest stable version. So not of the, I'm never using, or almost never using the feature phase, but only the maintenance phase software. So currently I'm using 13.0, the latest build.
Okay, cool. Just to confirm what you said earlier, you are recommending that people use a triple AV server for authentication now, rather than using the default gateway.
Yeah. Just because Citrix will discontinue the old way of authenticating, and we will probably have to update quick for some reason, and it's always good to be prepared, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. Do you always strive for an A+ rating on your ADC deployments?
Yes, I do. But I have written a blog about it and tried to discuss it. An A+ rating absolutely makes sense with a gateway. No discussion about it, but it doesn't make sense with all of the web servers. Look at my blog, for example. My blog is just a blog, isn't it? So there is no chance to log on for anybody, because the web application firewall will not permit you to log on. So there is no data you could steal from here. It's just my blog. What sense does an A+ rating make? It doesn't make any sense. I score an A+ because I can, and the number of hits is relatively small, so my ADC can handle the number of requests easily. But from technical point of view, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. I just do because I can.
Something I've learned with the SSL server scans as well is so I have a few clients that have asked to secure the ADC and remove certain cipher suites. And if you remove all of the cipher suites, that's recommended from some pen tests, you actually get less than an A+ rating because you have less keys for exchange, but your server is actually more secure. So you need to understand what you're doing there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the demo that you did, it was shown to enable the IP reputation feature. There was a field to fill in a proxy server. Someone's querying what you put in there.
So this is an issue with a lot of deployments I have been working with. There is no internet access in the DMZ network. Some of the ADC. So this is a kind of setup I've seen a lot. The ADC doesn't have a route to the internet. Instead, it's using MBS. So all the requests coming in will go back to the MAC address where they came from. And the ADC doesn't have internet access. If the ADC doesn't have internet access, it will need to have a proxy server to go to the internet to download the Iap Reputation database, because it can go directly. And the proxy server is only used with the Iap Reputation feature. It's not used for anything else.
Yeah, and someone says here, IP Reputation, you should be able to perform a basic test if you use the Tor browser.
If you use the Tor browser, the Tor exit points should be on the list, so you shouldn't be able to connect if you use the Tor browser.
Yeah,
this could be a way to test the feature.
Okay, cool. That's all the questions for now. Carry on, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Great. So, whoops, there was I think I messed it up. This is distributed denial of service. Should be DOS. So, unfortunately, the Citrix doesn't permit to use the application quality of experience, the AppQE feature, with the Citrix Gateway. I didn't understand why. I had a chat with one of the guys from product development team, and he explained it to me, but I couldn't understand. All his arguments looked a little bit strange to me. So we can't use this. This would be a great feature because it's really cool denial of service protection, but we can't use it. So we have to go into a way more basic feature, into rate limiting. Rate limiting can be used with responder policies or with bot protection feature. I will use it with responder policies, but we could also use it with bot protection feature. I will show you later. So we have to distinguish between a denial of service protection and distributed denial of service protection. A denial of service protection is one bad guy sending requests, while a distributed denial of service protection is a bunch of bad guys sending requests. The idea of a denial of service, of course, is to send that many requests so the server, in this case the gateway, will break down. It's not mentioned in my slides, but good denial of service protection is done on two sides. It has to be done on side of your gateway, and at the same time, the internet provider has to do denial of service protection as well, because it doesn't help if you can protect yourself, but the internet connection is settled. So the internet provider has to do denial of service protection as well. Well, the denial of service protection will limit the number of requests from a single IP address. So no matter to which URL, a certain amount of requests is permitted, everything beyond will be blocked. It's simple, it's basic, it's efficient. The DOS protection, of course, should only focus on unauthenticated users, so it will not harm legitimate authenticated gateway users. So a user that's currently unauthenticated will have a chance to send, let's say, 50 requests in 10 seconds and not more. But as soon as a user is authenticated, he should be able to send as many requests as he likes, as he needs. The number of requests used to show the gateway depends on the theme you are using. I found out in most cases there are around about 40 requests. These 40 requests, of course, don't include files logon attempts. There are 2 more requests per files logon logon. So I usually set the rate limiting somewhere to 50, 70 requests. It's not that important to set it as tight as any possible, because a denial of service will only be successful if the number of requests is really huge. So 100 requests is nothing for a gateway. So it will not break if somebody sends 100 requests and will be blocked after this. So set it high enough. Don't set it too tight. The good thing about DOS protection is the rate limiting feature is available in standard edition. So we don't have to pay extra money for it. But if you set up DOS protection, you should always keep in mind there are NAT environments. And all of the users behind a NAT firewall look like a single user. So if you would limit to, let's say, 100 requests within 5 minutes, there's only a chance for 2 users to log on within 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the table is cleared and another 2 users can log on. So you have to keep this in mind if you set the limit. Now, how can we find if a user is authenticated or not? It depends on cookies. Citrix will send 2 cookies to the users. The NSCA AAA cookie, NetScaler authentication cookie, this is sent because the user is authenticated, and the NSC_VPN error, the VPN error cookie. And all the rate limiting features should only be in effect if the cookie doesn't exist. So you should always use something like HTTP request cookie contains NSC_AAA.not. So this couldn't happen. So an authenticated user is not affected by denial of service protection policies. So if we use rate limiting, we need a limit selector. The selector will define a limit identifier. The limit identifier in this case is the IP address. And I will use the selector top client. This is client IP source. And I need a limit identifier. The identifier contains the selector. The request rate should always be, the mode should always be based on requests. The limit type should be bursty. This is how many requests will we permit. And this is a time slice in milliseconds. So this would be 300 seconds, which would be 50 minutes, which is too much. So the limit identifier defines how many requests we will permit in which time slice. And the limit type should always be bursty. Bursty means these 10 requests within 50 minutes could happen all at the same time in the very first second, or they could be distributed in a smooth way. The other way we could do instead of bursty would be smooth. In smooth, they have to be there mustn't be a burst, but they have to come one and the next one and the next one and the next one, so they are evenly distributed all over the time slice. We could also limit bandwidth and send traps, of course, if the limit is hit. Could also limit bandwidth, but that doesn't make sense. And we will bind the responder policy directly to the gateway, and the action of the policy should be a drop. I'm always a fan of dropping. Now, what should we take care of? Oh, I'm far beyond time. The policy counts the number of requests to any URL, so images, style sheets, and so on. There will be around about 40 requests. It's easy to find out how many requests we have. I will show you. Keep in mind NAT environments. So many users will look like a single user. Choose the limit carefully, so you don't cut the capacity of your gateway just because of a stupid limit. From command line, you can execute the show limit identifier and the name of the identifier to see what's in the table. And show limit sessions and the name of the limit identifier will show you all the IP addresses in the table. The tables are relatively small, so they don't waste too much RAM on the gateway. So that's an easy one. Distributed denial of service protection is a bit harder to do. It will limit the total number of requests to the gateway, independent of IP addresses or IP addresses and URLs. So it's a bit more complex than a DOS protection. And there's a minimum risk for an ADC to run out of memory because of the table. If somebody sends huge URL requests, so huge URLs, the table will be extremely big and will crash the ADC. So we have to take care for this. I will show you how to do it. It requires long-term monitor to set the matrix correctly. and there's always a risk to cut your daily business. So I would suggest starting with a policy with a no-op action first, and then see if there's something in the logs, using user configurable log messages, and check the logs. And if there's nothing in it, you would just change from no-op to drop. So it's quite similar to the DOS protection. We have to create a stream selector because there's no built-in one. So I call this cell DOS. And it contains two counters, HTTP request URL path. So this is just a path, no query string behind. And client IP source. So it is the URLs and the IP addresses. So there's a two columns table. It builds up a huge table, so it's costly in terms of RAM, and therefore we will need an extra policy blocking everything that's not in the that's not no valid URL. So therefore I will create a policy that's blocking everything that will return a 404 not found. And again, it's available in standard edition. I will show you how to do it. I will speed up a little bit because I'm way behind time. I'm sorry for this, I messed it up. So it's all in App Expert. First of all, I will show you how to find out which URLs we are using. So I will just press F12 to my browser. This works with most of the browsers. It even works with Chrome, but I think it doesn't work with the Microsoft browser. And I search here, and you see well, it's relatively small. You see there's a lot of requests here. So I don't know why it's that slow. Maybe because the VM is. So you see, it took me 32 requests to connect here. If I'm logging on, there will be some more. I will do a files logon first. So we are 32. Now we are 34. So there are three more for the files logon. To a correct logon. Now I'm in. So I have a list of URLs that actually get. So there is a list of URLs unauthenticated users should be able to connect to. And I created a pattern set. The pattern set is here, containing all these URLs. So you see, this is the list, this is the pattern set. And I created a responder policy. This one. So you see, HTTP request cookie contains NSC _ AAA not. So it's a non-authenticated user. I will put this first because it is easy to check, and this needs a check against all the list, and therefore I will do this second, and then I will check if it's not on the list. So if the AAA cookie is not there, and it is on the list, it's not on the list, I will drop. This is the first step. The second step is I go into rate limiting, create a selector, create an identifier, sorry. The selector would be the top client, so just the IP address. Firstly, I will set threshold, let's say, to 50, and the time slice to, well, let's say 20 seconds. So this is throttling down a denial of service attack very much. I will create a limit. And next I have to create a responder policy. Like this. The action will be a drop. The expression will be HTTP request cookie contains NSC_AAA not, forgot about the not, and this would be system check limit this limit. So I will drop if the AAA cookie does not exist. 2 quotation marks. Made some mistake here, and the limit is reached. And again, I will bind this to the gateway server. Done. So the first, so if you look at the gateway, the first policy on top is, it's pretty slow, isn't it? Is the IP reputation. The second one is checking if it's one of the gateway URLs. And the third one is if it's not one of the gateway URLs, so this one didn't hit, this one didn't hit, we will check if the limit is reached. And the DDoS would be quite similar, but I would have to create a selector on my own. And insert client IP source and HTTP request URLs. Probably just a path. So I don't care about the query strings like this. And again, I will have to create a limit identifier for DDoS. Select the selector. Set the threshold smaller in this case. There's no need to get the same file more than 5 times in a row. Time slice could be the same, but I tend to use a way smaller time slice here because I want to save memory on the ADC. So this would be 5 seconds, and create the same policy as I did for the DOS policy. Leee, do we have questions?
We do have a question.
Yeah.
Citrix Gateway is using an outdated version of JavaScript library. When doing SSL pen test, this is always showing up with a level 3 vulnerability. Any way of updating the library manually, or should they wait for a future firmware build?
I would not up. So you are talking about the Java on the ADC, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, Java, the JavaScript library that's built into the gateway.
Yeah, I would not touch the Java on the ADC for two reasons. First of all, I would be afraid to break the gateway or to get some, how can I say, to see some issues nobody ever in the world had seen before. And the other reason is Java is not exposed to users, so I would not take this too serious. But I know sometimes with security audits, you have to do what they tell you, but I would try to avoid.
Okay.
Some more?
No, that's all of them.
That's all of them. Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one is bot protection. So there is no benefit in having our Citrix Gateway listed on search engines. Nobody needs to search for our gateway. Users should know the gateway. Gateways are easy to find because there are some typical strings on the website, so you can search for on Google, on Baidu, on Yandex, whatever, for gateways. And you can even search for gateways for a specific site by adding site and the base URL of the company. So even if the gateway is hard to guess, users will be able to, hackers will be able to find it. So there's nothing like a good bot. So even the Google crawler is a bad bot from terms of the gateway. That's at least that's what I think. Bots usually use highly automated, are highly automated, so there are no keystrokes, no mouse clicks. But bot protection may find out using a script on a client side if the user does some clicks, if the user does some keystrokes. So we can turn on keyboard and mouse detection in the bot protection to find out if this is a legitimate user. This does not work with Citrix plugin, with the VPN plugin. Bot management is new in 13.0 onwards, of course. It allows to block all well-known bots, just like the usual crawlers, but also malicious ones. Allows you to find out if there are mouse movements, keystrokes, and things like this. It allows you to add a trap URL into a website, so also into the gateway. If somebody traps the URL, so if the crawler, for example, downloads the site and follows this trap URL, this honeypot URL, it will be on a blacklist and be blocked automatically. And it may integrate with the Iap Reputation feature, also with the rate limiting feature. Unfortunately, we can't bind the bot protection to the gateway. So we need a hack for this. I think it's a good feature with the gateway, but it doesn't work. So we have to bind it globally. But this will, of course, affect all the other servers on the gateway as well, on the gateway server as well. So the bind point will be global type request default. And this binding can only be done by command line bind bot global name of the minus policy name of the policy, minus priority, minus go to priority expression, and type is request default. And the expression of the policy, of course, has to filter on the AAA cookies and on the host name of the gateway. So it doesn't affect anything else. So this would be something like HTTP request hostname equals gateway.mydomain.com, and the AAA cookie is not there. So we already had this. These are the cookies they are adding. So it would be something HTTP request cookie contains NSC _ AAA not and HTTP request host names equals gateway.training.lab, for example. I would like to demo this one as well, but to do a quick demo, not too much about it. So this is in security, bot management, enable the feature. The first thing I would do is I would create signatures. So they're the default bot signatures, and I will just clone these ones. I get all the signatures here, and you see this is an XML file. And for this one, for example, a.brc-cy.russia is a job true, but for @this.com, for example, drop is set to false. I don't like this to happen, so I will select all this, copy this into the editor. Where is it? Text editor, here we are. Copy it into the editor, paste here, and I would just do a search and replace. We'll replace this drop false with drop true. Replace all. So we did a huge amount of replaces. Copy this into the clipboard. Paste it here. Now we have we created signatures that will block all the bots, the malicious, they have to get a name, of course. The well-known malicious one and the well-known non-malicious one will get blocked the same. And now I can create a profile. Select my signatures. I created, if there's multiple user agent headers in the request, I will drop, because no browser ever and no Citrix receiver ever will put multiple user agent headers in it. But I will do the same if there is no user agent header in it. The RFC needs user agent headers, so I will drop in this case, and I will lock everything. I will lock. I will drop. I will lock. We can enable keyboard mouse detection here. I will create the profile. We reopen it up, and there are some more things. There's a whitelist. There's a blacklist. I can add Iap Reputation here. So I will just enable Iap Reputation, and Iap Reputation is in here. I could add rate limiting here. I can add a bot trap. That's what I have been talking about. This is a random URL that gets added to the end of the page. So turn on logging, of course, and drop requests. As soon as somebody jumps into the drop into the trap URL, and update my profile. So the profile is here, and I will create a policy. And I will use the expression like I mentioned before. Find the unauthenticated users. Cookie contains like this. Not, of course. And HTTP request hostname equals like this. So the policy will only be in effect if the user is an unauthenticated user connecting to my gateway, not to any of the load balancing, other load balancing vServers, HTTP load balancing vServers we have. Of course, select the profile here, create, and now I have to bind it the way I told you. Sorry. No, this is the gate. Yeah. Like this. Now it's bound globally. We look at show bindings. You see this is bound globally request default. If you look at the policy manager, you have to go into none. Doesn't work with some of the policies it works, with some of them it does not. So the bind point is none. Okay. I spent too much time. I'm sorry for this.
You've not done too bad, actually, Johannes. You've got a couple more questions which I missed on the last round, so apologies there, Chad. Yeah. You didn't go in WAF. Do you recommend setting up security for the gateway outside of WAF for IP reputation, rate limiting, bot protection, for protecting the gateway page?
Let's do this as a last one, because this is a huge one. Give me the next one, please.
Okay. The next question is from the same person, and it is WAF, if you're only running gateway, not necessary?
Okay, so it's all about WAF. So I will just go a little bit into the WAF. It's one of the last ones I've written, so I can show this. No. I'm not proud of this one because it's not everything is right in here. I have to go into this again, but the part of the WAF is okay. We have to decide whether or not we want to use the WAF prior to authentication or after. After the authentication, we can use the WAF with like any WAF policy for any of the load balancing vServers on the gateway server on the ADC. But before authentication, it's very tricky because we cannot bind WAF policies, and we cannot bind it globally. So we have to do an HTTP call out to a server. In many cases, we have two ADCs, one internally, one externally, and that just do an echo server on the internal gateway server. So any request coming from outside will be sent to this echo server, and the echo server will return a 200 OK. And I will bind the WAF to the echo server. So I'm not actually protecting the gateway, but I'm protecting the HTTP callout. And every time the HTTP callout does not return a 200 OK, so because the web application firewall found something to block, the callout will be not successful, and therefore the request will be dropped. I did it this once in a project. It turned out to be difficult, like all the web application firewall projects are. It was a kind of nightmare, to be honest. But in the end, we made it. It works. This is a high security sensitive customer, and they see a lot of very streamlined targeted attacks, so it's worthwhile for them to do. But we have never seen the WAF finding anything. So we put a lot of effort in it, maybe a year ago, but the WAF never trapped an attack. So if you ask me if it makes sense, it depends very much on how much money you want to put in it. It's at least 2 weeks of work. And how much risk you are facing. But I would tend to say no, doesn't make sense.
Okay, so an honest answer. There are no more questions right now.
There are no more questions. That's great. I have put some links here. These are my slides. You can download my slides. So this is tinyurl.com/Citrix user group community -Norz-2022-05. So you can download them from there. There are some more links, but nothing. Okay, thank you. Stephanie.
Hi. Thank you.
It took very long, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You had a nice comment in the chat that said, very informative webinar, no objection extending the time. So I think
great.
Yeah.
I like it.
So thank you. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Johannes, for sharing all of this information. It's super valuable. I'll include that link that's in that slide to the deck in the follow-up email, so people can, if you didn't capture it, then I'll send it out to you with the recording link tomorrow. And thank you to Leee for being on another webinar with me. Nice little webinar duo.
Thank you, Leee.
Always
You did a good job.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Stephanie. Much appreciated.
All right, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Love having you with us today, and we'll see you hopefully at maybe in Kansas City next week, maybe, or if not, on another virtual event or webinar coming up soon. So everyone, take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
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 Cheers.